A quiet older black man sits alone on his porch, the afternoon sun warming his face. Above him, an American flag he raised himself flutters gently in the suburban breeze. Suddenly, the peace is broken. The arrogant HOA president storms up his walkway, her face a mask of indignation. She doesn't ask. She demands the flag be taken down, her voice loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. What she doesn't know, what nobody knows, is that the humble man she is trying to humiliate is no ordinary resident. He is a decorated 4-star general, a man who once led thousands of troops in the defense of that very flag. Her petty tyranny has awakened a sleeping lion, and when his old comrade arrives, a current general in full dress uniform, jaws will drop across Willow Creek as a single powerful salute changes everything. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The quiet of the sunny suburban morning was a fragile thing, easily shattered. It was a peace Harold Daniels had come to cherish, a gentle reward after a lifetime of noise and conflict. But he knew, better than most, that peace was never guaranteed. It had to be guarded. Sometimes it had to be fought for, even on a perfectly manicured lawn in a neighborhood called Willow Creek. The first crack in that peace came in the form of a woman marching across his lawn. Her name was Claire Whitmore, and she walked with the kind of stiff-backed certainty that came from believing the world was a set of rules she was meant to enforce. She carried a clipboard like a shield and wore a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Her target was the solitary black man sitting calmly on his porch, a man she had already labeled in her mind as a problem. Harold watched her approach, his posture relaxed, his hands resting on his knees. He had faced down warlords and dictators. A neighborhood enforcer held no terror for him. He simply waited. Claire stopped at the bottom of his porch steps, positioning herself just so. She wanted the neighbors to see. She wanted them to hear. This was a performance, a public display of her authority. She didn't bother with a greeting. "I'm Claire Whitmore, the HOA president," she announced, her voice sharp and loud. "That flagpole is not in compliance with community bylaws. Section 4, paragraph C. You need to take it down." She tapped the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail for emphasis. The sound was a sharp little crack in the quiet air. Harold's eyes didn't leave her face. His voice when he spoke was low and steady, a stark contrast to her shrill command. "That flag," he said, nodding his head toward the red, white, and blue fabric waving gently against the sky, "has a purpose." Claire's fake smile tightened. She was not here for a conversation. She was here to issue an order. "This isn't a military base, Mr. Daniels. This is Willow Creek. We have aesthetic standards to maintain." She raised her voice another notch, ensuring Mrs. Gable across the street, who was pretending to prune her roses, could hear every word. "The pole is a violation. The flag needs to come down. Today." Harold remained seated, a picture of calm. Inside, however, a lifetime of discipline was being tested. He thought of all the places he had seen that flag. He thought of the young faces that had looked up to it, seeking hope in the dust and chaos of faraway lands. He thought of the caskets he had seen it draped over, a final silent honor for a life given in service. And now, this woman was calling it an aesthetic violation. "That flag," he repeated, his voice still quiet but now laced with a cold iron. "Saved, it represents something more important than your bylaws." Claire let out a short, incredulous laugh. The sheer audacity of him. She took a step closer, invading his space, her face twisted with smug superiority. "I don't care what it represents to you. I care about the rules, and the rules say it goes." She looked around, making eye contact with a few peering neighbors. She wanted them to see her winning. "You have 24 hours to remove it, or you'll be fined. And trust me, the fines will keep coming until you comply." The threat hung in the air, thick and ugly. From the corner of his eye, Harold saw a young man trimming the hedges next door. The man had stopped working, his shears frozen in mid-air. He was watching, his expression a mixture of discomfort and helplessness. The young man's name was Mason Rivera, and the sight of Claire Whitmore's public shaming made his stomach churn. The tension was palpable. The whole street seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what the quiet old man would do next. Harold did nothing. He simply sat there, a silent, immovable object against an unstoppable force of petty tyranny. He knew this was just the first move in a game she didn't understand she was playing. Claire, basking in the power of the moment, felt the need to solidify her dominance. Her eyes scanned the scene and landed on the maintenance worker, Mason, who was still frozen by the hedges. He was an easy target, another piece on the board she could control. She turned her sharp-tongued attention on him, her voice dripping with condescension. "And you," she barked, pointing a finger at him. "You work for the HOA. That means you work for me. Keep your eyes on your work and off of other people's business." The public humiliation was a 2-for-1 deal. In a single breath, she had put both the old resident and the young worker in their place, reinforcing her position at the top of the neighborhood food chain. Some of the neighbors who were watching let out faint smirks. They were glad it wasn't them. Others looked away, a flicker of shame in their eyes for not speaking up, for being complicit in their silence. Mason felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. His hands, calloused and strong, gripped the handles of the hedge trimmers so tightly, his knuckles turned white. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell this woman that the old man deserved respect, that what she was doing was wrong, but the words caught in his throat. He needed this job. He had bills to pay, a life to piece back together. Arguing with the HOA president was a fast track to the unemployment line, so he clenched his jaw, forced his eyes down to the half-trimmed bushes, and said nothing. His silence felt like a betrayal. Harold saw it all. He saw the smirks on some faces and a discomfort on others. He saw the internal battle waging within the young maintenance worker. He had seen that same look in the eyes of young soldiers, caught between duty and conscience. Slowly, with a deliberate grace that defied his age, Harold Daniels stood up. He did not look at Claire. He did not acknowledge the watching neighbors. He turned his body to face the flag. His back straightened. He raised his right hand to his temple in a crisp, perfect salute. For a long moment he stood there, a solitary statue of defiance and honor. The gesture was so unexpected, so full of a quiet dignity that it momentarily silenced the entire street. It was an act of reverence that Claire, in her rage, could not comprehend or control. After holding the salute for a respectful beat, Harold lowered his arm, turned his back on the scene, and walked into his house without another word. The screen door clicked shut behind him, a sound that seemed as final as a judge's gavel. Claire was left standing on the lawn, momentarily flustered. She had been dismissed. She quickly regained her composure, making a triumphant, angry mark on her clipboard. "Fine," she called out the closed door. "Have it your way. The fines start tomorrow." She turned and marched back across the lawn, her victory feeling strangely hollow. The camera lingered on Mason. He was still staring at Harold's front door. The image of that salute burned into his mind. He was torn. He was just a maintenance man, but he was also a man who knew what that flag was supposed to mean, and what he had just witnessed felt like a desecration. The power imbalance was sickening, and the taste of injustice it left in his mouth was bitter and strong. Inside the cool quiet of his home, Harold Daniels walked past the simple, comfortable furniture his late wife, Eleanor, had picked out. He entered a small room at the back of the house, a room he used as a study. It was not ornate. The walls were lined with books, not awards. But on one simple wooden shelf, catching the afternoon light, was a display that told a different story. A row of medals lay nestled in a velvet-lined case. There was a Distinguished Service Cross, a silver star, multiple bronze stars for valor. Each one represented a moment of impossible choice, of courage under fire. Beside the case, a framed newspaper article, slightly yellowed with age, showed a picture of a younger Harold, his face stern and focused, his uniform adorned with the 4 stars of a full general. The headline read, "General Hawk. Daniels to retire after 38 years of distinguished service." The name Hawk had been given to him by his troops, for the way his eyes seemed to see everything from above, missing no detail on the battlefield. The room was a silent testament to a life lived at the highest levels of command. In his mind's eye, Harold could still see it all with perfect clarity. He could feel the vibrating floor of a Black Hawk helicopter as it descended into a dusty village in Afghanistan, the faces of the village elders a mixture of fear and hope. He could hear the tense, controlled quiet of the Pentagon's briefing room, the weight of a nation's security resting on the words he chose. He remembered standing firm, his voice never wavering, as he briefed a nervous president during an international crisis. He had commanded armies, advised world leaders, and held the lives of thousands in his hands. Yet, here he was now, in the present, living a life of deliberate simplicity. A few hours after Claire's confrontation, he was outside, not in uniform, but in old work pants and a faded t-shirt, mowing his lawn. The rhythmic roar of the engine was a kind of therapy, a mundane task that grounded him. He had moved to Willow Creek for this. For the peace. Eleanor had found the listing online. "Look, Harry," she had said, her voice full of warmth. "A normal house, on a normal street. No one will know you're a general. You can just be Harold. You can finally rest." He had agreed for her after she passed. Staying here, in the life she had chosen for them, was his way of keeping her memory alive. His silence in the face of Claire Whitmore's tirade wasn't weakness. It was the disciplined restraint of a man who understood the true nature of power. Power didn't need to shout. It didn't need to threaten and posture. Real power was patient. It watched, it learned, and it acted only when the moment was right. But as he guided the mower across the grass, his mind was clear. This wasn't about a flagpole anymore. This was about a principle. Claire Whitmore, in her blind arrogance, had crossed a line. She had disrespected, not just him, but the symbol he had dedicated his life to defending. She had disturbed the peace he had promised his wife he would find. And for that, there would be a reckoning. He would not be the one to start the fight, but he would most certainly be the one to finish it. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. It was his daughter, Sarah, a sharp, successful lawyer in Washington, D.C. One of the more sympathetic neighbors, Mrs. Gable, had called her immediately after the incident. Sarah's voice was a storm of outrage, crackling through the receiver. "Dad, I'm booking a flight right now. We're going to sue her. We'll sue the entire HOA. How dare she speak to you that way? Don't you say a word to them until I get there." Harold listened patiently, a small smile touching his lips. Her protective fire was a comfort. "Sarah, calm down," he said, his voice a gentle counterpoint to her fury. "I don't need you to fly down here and fight my battles. But Dad, she humiliated you, in front of everyone. You have to do something. Tell them who you are. Send them a picture of your uniform. That would shut her up fast." Harold settled into his favorite armchair, the one Eleanor always said molded to him perfectly. "And what would that prove, sweetheart? That a 4-star general gets special treatment? That's not the point. I came here to live like any other man. I wanted to see how people behave when they don't think they're talking to someone important." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Sometimes, people reveal their true selves only when they think you are beneath them. They show you exactly who they are when they believe you have no power to fight back." Sarah was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. She knew that tone in her father's voice. It was the same calm, strategic tone he used before making a major decision. He wasn't hiding. He was gathering intelligence. He was watching the enemy reveal their tactics, their weaknesses, their character. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked, her voice now more curious than angry. "For now," Harold said, looking out the window at the flag, which was still flying, a defiant splash of color in the peaceful suburban landscape. "I'm going to watch. I'm going to let her think she's won. Let her get comfortable. Let her show everyone in this neighborhood exactly who is in charge and what kind of person she is." He was laying a trap, not with soldiers and weapons, but with silence and observation. And he knew, with a certainty born from decades of strategic command, that Claire Whitmore was walking straight into it. As dusk settled over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns, Mason Rivera finished his last job of the day. But he couldn't go home. He found himself driving back past Harold Daniels' house, drawn by an uneasy feeling he couldn't shake. He parked his work truck down the street and watched the American flag flapping softly in the twilight, illuminated by the small spotlight Harold had aimed at its base. The image of the old man's salute, so crisp and dignified, played over and over in his mind. It felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. There was something about Harold Daniels, a quiet authority that didn't square with him just being some random retiree. On a hunch, Mason pulled out his phone. The light from the screen illuminated his face in the dark cab of the truck. He typed Harold Daniels into the search bar, not really expecting to find anything. The first few results were generic, but then he added Army to the search. His breath caught in his throat. the screen filled with articles, photographs, and official records. General Harold Hawk Daniels. The words seemed to leap off the screen. Mason's eyes widened. He clicked on a photo. It was a younger Harold in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. He was pinning a medal on a young soldier. Mason felt a jolt, a shock of recognition that ran through him like an electric current. He remembered he had been there. Not at that specific medal ceremony, but at a base near Fallujah. Years ago, General Daniels had flown in to address the troops before a major operation. Mason had just been a kid then, a private first class, scared and trying not to show it. He remembered standing in the blistering Iraqi sun, listening to this general speak. He didn't remember all the words, but he remembered the feeling they gave him. A feeling of purpose, of being part of something important, a feeling of being led by someone who was steady, strong and unafraid. And he had just stood there, earlier today, and watched a woman with a clipboard treat that same man like dirt. A wave of shame washed over him, hot and sickening. This wasn't just some old man, this was a living legend. Mason's mind raced. He quickly screenshotted the articles and photos. Then he had another idea. He went to the Willow Creek HOA website and downloaded the community handbook, the very one Claire had cited. He scrolled through the pages, his eyes scanning the dense text, until he found it. Section 4. Paragraph C. It detailed restrictions on permanent structures, but then he saw a subsection he was sure Claire had conveniently ignored. Section 4. Paragraph D. Exception. It clearly stated that a freestanding flagpole for the display of the American flag was permissible, provided it did not exceed 20 feet in height. Harold's pole was at most 15 feet tall. Claire wasn't just being a tyrant. She was breaking her own rules to bully a man she thought wouldn't fight back. That was it. The decision was made. The debate that had been raging inside him was over. He was no longer just an observer. He printed the article and the relevant page from the handbook at a 20. The next morning, with the sun barely up, Mason Rivera walked up the driveway to Harold Daniels' house, the folded papers in his hand. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He was a soldier again, and he had just found his commanding officer. The door opened and Harold Daniels stood there, already dressed for the day. He didn't look surprised to see Mason. He simply looked at him with those calm, knowing eyes. "Good morning, son," he said. "Can I help you?" "Sir," Mason began, the word coming out instinctively. "My name is Mason Rivera. I was a private in the 121st. I heard you speak once. In Iraq." He held out the folded papers. "I saw what happened yesterday, and I looked up the rules. She's wrong, sir. The flagpole is compliant. And I wanted you to have this." Harold took the papers and glanced at them. He looked from the printout of his own military career to the page from the HOA handbook, then back to Mason's earnest face. He gestured for Mason to come inside. A few minutes later, the two men were sitting at the kitchen table, mugs of black coffee steaming between them. The silence was comfortable, the kind of easy quiet that exists between men who share a certain kind of experience. "Tell me your story, Rivera," Harold said gently. Mason, who hadn't spoken about his service to anyone in years, found himself opening up. He talked about Iraq, the deployments, the difficulty of coming home. He talked about the nightmares that sometimes still woke him up in a cold sweat. He confessed his shame, his feeling of being lost after leaving the army, of ending up trimming hedges and cleaning gutters for people who looked right through him. "I feel like a failure sometimes, sir," Mason admitted, his voice low. "Working a job like this after all." Harold looked him dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering and clear. "Listen to me, son. There is no shame in honest work. There is honor in any job done right, whether you're commanding a battalion or mowing a lawn. The uniform doesn't make the man. The character does. And what you did yesterday, by standing silent when you wanted to act, that took discipline. What you're doing here this morning, that takes courage." Harold's words landed on Mason like a benediction. He felt a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying begin to lift from his shoulders. He felt seen, truly seen. For the first time in a long time, they had formed an alliance, right there at that simple kitchen table. It was an alliance built on shared service and mutual respect, silent, steady, and disciplined. Harold leaned forward slightly. "I appreciate what you've done, but I'm going to ask you not to act on it just yet." Don't go to the board. Don't confront Claire. Mason looked confused. But sir, we have proof. I know, Harold said with a small strategic smile, and we'll use it, but not yet. Right now, we let the enemy make the mistakes. We give them the rope, Mason. They'll do the rest themselves. Mason nodded, understanding completely. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was an operation, and he was getting his orders directly from the general. Claire Whitmore was on a victory lap. A few days after the confrontation, she convened a special meeting of the HOA board in the community clubhouse. The room was beige and soulless, but to Claire, it was her kingdom. She stood at the head of the long table, beaming at the 3 other board members, a trio of nervous, compliant residents who had long ago learned that disagreeing with Claire was more trouble than it was worth. I'm pleased to report, she began, her voice dripping with self-congratulation, that we are making great strides in maintaining the aesthetic integrity of Willow Creek. She didn't mention Harold by name, but everyone knew who she was talking about. We had a recent issue with a non-compliant resident, but I have handled it decisively. The violation is being rectified as we speak. She paused for effect, enjoying the sense of her own importance. It's so important that we stay on top of these things. You let one little thing slide and before you know it, the whole neighborhood starts to go downhill. Certain people, if you don't set clear boundaries, can bring down property values for everyone. Her words were coated in a thin veneer of civility, but the racist undertones were clear to anyone listening. She was talking about Harold, the only black man on her street, and framing him as a threat to their carefully curated suburban paradise. In the back of the room, sitting on a folding chair and trying to be invisible, was Claire's teenage daughter, Judy. She was supposed to be waiting for a ride, but she found herself listening, her stomach twisting with a familiar mix of embarrassment and disgust. She watched her mother preen and posture, and a frown creased her forehead. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling, trying to drown out her mother's voice. In fact, Claire continued, her enthusiasm growing, I think this incident shows us that our current fine structure may not be a strong enough deterrent. I propose we draft a motion to double the fines for all aesthetic violations, effective immediately. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dave, a mild-mannered accountant, cleared his throat.
Now, Claire, is that really necessary? That seems a bit steep.
Claire's smile vanished, replaced by a cold glare. Is it, Dave, or is it necessary to protect the multi-million-dollar investment we all have in this community? Dave shrank back in his chair, immediately retreating.
No, you're right, of course.
No one else dared to challenge her. They nodded nervously, their consent bought with social pressure and fear. Claire's smile returned, triumphant. She let out a small, cruel laugh. Good. Let's see if the flag guy and his little maintenance man friend like that. Judy heard the comment and flipped. She looked up from her phone, saw the smug, ugly look on her mother's face, and felt a deep, profound sense of shame. A few days later, the official letter arrived. It wasn't just a notice, it was a declaration of war. Mason was trimming the flower beds across the street when he saw the mail carrier deliver it. He watched as Harold retrieved it from the mailbox, his movements slow and deliberate. From a distance, Mason could see the bright red, angry letters stamped across the top of the page. Final warning. Later that day, Mason saw the letter himself. Harold had shown it to him. It was even worse than he imagined. The language was aggressive and riddled with legal threats that Claire had clearly cobbled together from the internet. It spoke of property liens, HOA, initiated lawsuits, daily escalating fines, and even hinted at police involvement for failure to comply with community governance. It was a masterpiece of petty intimidation, designed to scare an ordinary person into submission. But Harold Daniels was not an ordinary person. He read the letter with a calm detachment, as if analyzing an enemy's propaganda leaflet. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore house, the letter became a source of conflict. Judy had seen her mother typing it up the night before, a grimly satisfied look on her face. Now, seeing the official copy on the kitchen counter, she finally spoke up. "Mom, why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "It's just a flag. He's a nice old man." Claire barely looked up from her phone, where she was scrolling through the Neighborhood Watch social media page. "It's not about the flag, Judy. It's about the principle. It's about rule." "But Mason said the rules actually allow it," Judy countered, remembering a brief, whispered conversation she'd had with the maintenance worker. Claire's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed. What did you say? You've been talking to the help. Don't you listen to him? He doesn't know what he's talking about. He seemed to think he did. Judy persisted. And this letter, it's horrible. You're threatening to take his house. A fury rose in Claire's face. It was the anger of someone whose authority had been questioned by their own child. I am doing what is necessary to protect this community, she snapped. This is my neighborhood. I built this HOA from the ground up. I set the standards, and no one, not some random old man and certainly not the janitor, is going to tell me what I can and can't do here. Her voice rose, her ego on full display. It was a raw, unfiltered confession. This was never about the bylaws or property values. This was about her power, her control. She saw the block, the entire neighborhood, as her personal property. From his vantage point across the street, Mason watched the lighted window of the Whitmore's kitchen. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see the angry gestures, the defiant posture of Claire and the pained, retreating figure of her daughter. He lifted his phone, aimed the camera, and took a few pictures of the scene. It was more evidence, more documentation of the obsession that was driving Claire Whitmore to her own downfall. He was preparing to act, just as the general had instructed. The time was getting close. The time had come. That evening, after the sun had set, Harold Daniels walked into his study. The room was dark, save for the single lamp on his desk that cast a warm glow on the polished wood. He sat down in his leather chair, the one that had held him through countless late nights of planning and decision-making. For a moment he sat in the quiet, gathering his thoughts. Then he reached into his desk and unlocked a small, unassuming drawer. It was the only locked thing in his house. Inside, nestled among a few personal keepsakes, was a small, hard case. He opened it. It contained a set of business cards, simple and official. He picked one up, his fingers tracing the embossed seal of the United States Army. The card read, General Elias Brower, Commanding General, U.S. Army Forces Command. Eli. His former aide, his protege, his friend. A man he trusted as much as he trusted anyone on Earth. Harold picked up the secure encrypted satellite phone he kept in the same drawer. He dialed the number from memory. It rang only once before it was picked up. A deep, familiar voice answered, professional and alert. Brower. Eli. Harold said, his voice calm and even. It's Hawk. There was a momentary pause on the other end, and then the professionalism in General Brower's voice melted away, replaced by genuine warmth and respect. Sir, it's good to hear your voice. Is everything all right? Everything is fine, Eli. But I need to ask for a favor. Anything, sir. You know that. Name it. Harold looked out the window of his study, at the dark silhouette of the flagpole against the night sky. I need you to come to Willow Creek. There's a community meeting tomorrow night. And Eli, I need you in your Class A uniform. Full dress. Another pause, this one filled with curiosity. General Brower knew Harold well enough to know he would never make such a request lightly. A full-dress uniform appearance by a commanding general was not a casual thing. It was a statement. Say no more, sir, Brower replied, his tone shifting back to military efficiency. There was no hesitation, no questioning. It was an order received and understood. Send me the time and location. I'm on my way. You'll want to see this, Eli, Harold added, a hint of steel in his voice. I promise it will be worth the trip. I have no doubt, sir, Brower said. See you tomorrow. Harold ended the call and placed the satellite phone back in its drawer. He then picked up a heavy gold ring with a dark stone set in it. His West Point class ring. He hadn't worn it in years. He slid it onto his finger. It felt heavy, familiar. He was no longer just Harold the retiree, tending his guard. He was General Harold Hawk Daniels, and he was preparing the field for the final engagement. He walked outside into the cool night air, and stood before his flag, tending to it one last time before the storm broke. The Willow Creek Community Center buzzed with a low, anxious energy. The fluorescent lights gave everyone a pale, washed-out look. Claire had called a mandatory HOA meeting, her final move to publicly humiliate Harold and cement her authority. She stood at a podium at the front of the room, beaming, soaking in the attention. She had dressed for the occasion in a severe-looking pantsuit, her clipboard of violations ready at her side. Most of the residents were there, packed into uncomfortable folding chairs. They had come out of a mixture of obligation, fear, and a morbid curiosity to see the final act of the drama. Harold Daniels was there, seated in the back row, a picture of quiet composure. Next to him sat Mason Rivera, his expression grim and determined. Claire tapped the microphone, a shrill feedback noise making everyone wince. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "As you know, we take our community standards very seriously here in Willow Creek. It's what keeps our property values high and ensures this remains a desirable place to live." She launched into a long-winded speech, flaunting the new draconian fine policies the board had rubber-stamped. She spoke of enforcement and compliance, her words painting a picture of a neighborhood under constant threat from rogue elements. Finally, she arrived at her main event. She turned and pointed a dramatic finger toward the back of the room, directly at Harold. "Unfortunately, we have a resident who believes the rules do not apply to him. Mr. Daniels has stubbornly refused to remove an unauthorized flagpole, a clear and persistent violation that has become a stubborn eyesore on our otherwise pristine street." A murmur went through the crowd. This was it, the public shaming. Claire's smile was predatory. "Therefore, at this meeting, the board will vote on levying the maximum possible fines and beginning legal proceedings to place a lien on his property." Just as she said the word property, the heavy double doors at the back of the community center swung open with a decisive thud. Everyone turned. The low hum of conversation died instantly, replaced by a stunned, collective silence. Standing in the doorway were two uniformed soldiers, their postures ramrod straight, their faces impassive. They were flanking a third man, an officer whose uniform was covered in so much decoration it seemed to shimmer under the cheap fluorescent light. Medals, ribbons, and on his shoulders the unmistakable silver stars of a high-ranking general. It was General Elias Brower, and he commanded the attention of the entire room without saying a single word. He was followed by a small convoy of aides, their presence turning the beige community room into something that felt more like a military tribunal. The residents of Willow Creek could only stare, their mouths slightly agape. Their little neighborhood drama had just been invaded by the full force and authority of the United States military. General Brower's eyes scanned the room, cold and assessing. They passed over the shocked faces of the residents, passed over the sputtering, confused expression on Claire Whitmore's face, and locked onto one man. Harold Daniels, with a stride that was all purpose and power. General Brower walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct. He ignored everyone else, his focus absolute. He walked directly up to the back row, where Harold was sitting. Harold stood to meet him. General Brower stopped a foot in front of him, brought his heels together with an audible click, and raised his hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. It was a gesture of profound respect, a subordinate reporting to a superior officer. "General Daniels, sir," Brower's voice boomed, filling the cavernous silence of the room. "Permission to stand beside you." The room erupted in a collective gasp. Not a whisper, but a single, unified sound of shock. "General Daniels, sir." The words ricocheted off the walls and into the brains of every resident. The quiet old man, the stubborn rule breaker, a 4-star general. Faces turned pale. The neighbors who had smirked at Harold's humiliation now looked like they had seen a ghost. Mrs. Gable's hand flew to her mouth. Claire Whitmore's face had gone from smug to confused to utterly ashen. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her in real time. What is the meaning of this?" she stammered, trying to regain control, her voice a pathetic squeak. "This is a private HOA meeting." General Brower did not lower his salute. He didn't even turn his head. He kept his eyes locked on Harold. It was Harold who gave a slight nod, returning the gesture of respect. Only then did Brower lower his arm. He turned his head slowly and fixed Claire with a glare so cold, so full of controlled fury, that she physically flinched. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Are you the individual who threatened a decorated 4-star general of the United States Army? Did you threaten to file a lawsuit against a man who has commanded entire divisions in defense of this nation for flying the flag he fought to defend?" He let the question hang in the thick, suffocating air. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was deafening. It was the silence of judgment. In the corner, unnoticed by her mother, Judy Whitmore held up her phone. The small red light was on. She was recording every single second of her mother's spectacular fall from grace. The spell of silence was broken by Harold. He stepped forward, his movements calm and measured. In his hand was a simple manila folder. He walked to the front of the room and placed it on the table in front of the shell-shocked board members. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room, "I believe you'll find this of interest." Dave, the accountant, opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside, it wasn't just a copy of the HOA bylaws. It was a sheaf of legal documents. There were signed affidavits from several veteran support organizations, pledging their full legal and financial backing. There was a preliminary filing for a civil lawsuit against the Willow Creek HOA and its president for targeted harassment and discrimination based on veteran status. The lawsuit cited specific, documented instances of Claire's behavior. Just then, Mason Rivera stepped forward. He walked to the small projector that Claire had planned to use for her presentation and plugged his phone into it. "And this," Mason said, his voice clear and steady, "is for context." An image flashed onto the screen behind the board members. It was a photo Mason had taken, showing Claire on Harold's lawn, her face twisted in anger. Then came a video. The audio was clear. It was Claire, berating Mason, telling him to keep his eyes on his work. Then another clip. This one audio only, taken from Judy's phone during the last board meeting. Claire's voice filled the room. "Certain people, if you don't set clear boundaries, can bring down property values for everyone. Let's see if the flag guy and his little maintenance man friend, like that." The board members looked at the evidence, then at Claire, their faces a mixture of horror and fury. They weren't just looking at a lawsuit, they were looking at a public relations nightmare. They saw their own complicity, their own nervous silence, being exposed. Dave found his voice first. I move for an immediate vote," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "A vote to remove Claire Whitmore as president of this association, effective immediately." Second, another board member practically shouted. All in favor. Every hand on the board shot up instantly. It was unanimous. Claire was fired. Stripped of her title, her power, her identity, in a matter of seconds. She stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. She looked around the room for support, for an ally, for anyone, but no one would meet her eye. The neighbors she had ruled through fear were now looking at her with contempt. She saw her daughter, Judy, standing near the exit, her face a mask of shame. Judy gave her one last, disappointed look, then turned and walked out the door, abandoning her. Claire tried to argue, to protest. "You can't do this." But no one was listening anymore. She was left standing alone at the podium, a solitary figure in a room full of people who had just erased her. Her petty power, the only thing she truly cared about, was gone. She was finished. In the aftermath of Claire's public downfall, a new sense of order settled over the room. The board, eager to make amends, turned their attention to Mason Rivera. Dave, now the acting president, cleared his throat. "Mr. Rivera," he said, his voice full of newfound respect, "your actions today, they were honorable. The board would like to formally apologize for Miss Whitmore's behavior toward you." He then looked at the other board members, who nodded in agreement. "Furthermore, the full-time position of HOA Facilities Manager is currently open. It comes with a salary, benefits, and a mandate to ensure our community is maintained with integrity. We would be honored if you would accept the position." Mason was stunned. He looked over at Harold, who gave him a small approving nod. The community, watching this unfold, broke into a spontaneous round of applause. It wasn't just for the job offer, it was for the quiet man who had stood up for what was right when no one else would. Mason felt a lump form in his throat. He simply nodded his acceptance, unable to speak. Harold walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. He shook Mason's hand firmly. "You stood up," Harold said, his voice low and full of pride. "Now stand tall." It was a moment of profound validation, a public acknowledgement of his character. As the meeting began to break up, a hesitant figure approached Harold. It was Judy Whitmore. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face etched with apology. "General Daniels," she said quietly. I'm so sorry for what my mother did, for all of it." Harold looked down at the young woman, his expression softening. He saw not the daughter of his tormentor, but a child in pain. It's not your apology to give, young lady, but I accept it. She's always been like that, Judy confessed, her voice cracking. Obsessed with control, with how things look. But today, you taught me more about dignity in 5 minutes than she has in my entire life. Harold nodded slowly. Sometimes the loudest voices are the weakest ones, Judy. Remember that. True strength is quiet. It's about doing the right thing, especially when no one is looking. He had not only won the battle, but he had also taught a valuable lesson to the next generation, planting a seed of wisdom in the ruins of her mother's tyranny. The next morning, the sun rose on a different Willow Creek. The air felt cleaner, lighter. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk in front of Harold Daniels' house. It wasn't a crowd of gawkers or accusers. It was a crowd of support, neighbors, board members, and even a few local news reporters who had gotten wind of the story. Harold walked out of his front door, and Mason was right there beside him. Together, they walked to the flagpole. There was no defiance in the act today, only a quiet sense of community. Harold attached the flag to the rope, and as he began to raise it, hands all over the street rose to cover hearts. A few of the veterans in the neighborhood, men who had kept their service quiet, rendered their own crisp salute. The flag climbed the pole, catching the morning breeze and unfurling against the bright blue sky. It was the same flag, the same pole, but it meant something different now. It was no longer a symbol of division. It was a symbol of respect. General Brower, who had stayed overnight at a nearby hotel, came to say his goodbyes. He shook Harold's hand, his expression one of deep admiration. "You haven't lost your touch, Hawk," he said with a smile. "You didn't just win a fight. You reminded these people what honor actually looks like outside of a parade. Some lessons need to be retaught now and then, Eli." Harold replied. The general departed, his duty done, leaving a transformed neighborhood in his wake. Later that day, peace finally returned to the port. Harold and Mason sat in the comfortable chairs, sipping iced tea, watching the flag fly. The silence between them was easy, a bond forged in a strange and unexpected conflict. The quiet had returned to Willow Creek, but it was a new kind of quiet. It was a peace that was no longer fragile. It was a peace built on a foundation of hard-won respect. Old Glory was still flying, and now, everyone understood why. You never know who you are disrespecting. Behind every quiet face, every humble man or woman trying to live a simple life, there is a story. There is a history of sacrifice, of challenges overcome, of a quiet strength you cannot see. Power doesn't always announce itself with a loud voice or a fancy title. It doesn't always wear a uniform or demand attention. Often, true power is patient. It is restrained. It watches. And it waits. It gives people the chance to show their true character. But when that quiet power finally does speak, when it is forced to stand up and reveal itself, its voice is unforgettable. It changes everything. It reminds us that dignity is not a privilege for the few, but a right for all, and that the deepest honor is often carried by those who never feel the need to boast about it. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.